This is George Dionne of the Rock is George podcast, and this is a KNAC.com exclusive interview with guitarist NICK VAN DYK of the progressive metal act Redemption. If I knew absolutely nothing about Redemption, how would you describe the band's music to me?
That's a good question. I think we are a hybrid of American power metal, European power metal, and progressive metal of the 90s. We have three sides to the music. There is I grew up in the sort of burgeoning San Francisco thrash era, so we are not the type of prog band that has 2 minutes of atmospheric keyboards before a song. So there is an aggressive side to us that almost sounds like a Nevermore with a bit more melody. And of course, since Tom Englund is our vocalist, we sound a bit like EVERYGREY, that side of us. There is a sort of melodic prog metal aspect to us. And then there's a third side, which I think can be the most fun, which is sort of almost a cinematic progressive metal, elements of prog rock, longer songs, really featuring orchestrations and all of it sort of building to, I guess the common thread, all of them tries to make an emotional connection with the listener. So less technical and more emotional, I suppose. That's way too long. I got to work on a better elevator pitch.
It works for me either way. The latest album is I Am the Storm. It's your 8th studio album. It came out on March 17th on AFM Records. It's getting fantastic reviews across the world. You must be very proud of that.
Yeah, Geddy Lee of Rush once said, "You're never finished with a record. It's just taken from you." So I go through a phase of thinking it's no good, and then I go through a phase of thinking it's pretty good, then I go through a phase of thinking, I like it, but I would have changed this one thing, and eventually you just got to let go. And what's most gratifying is that when our listeners dig it, then we can be happy. So
absolutely. You're the primary songwriter for this. Do you record these on your own, send them out to the guys to put their spin on it, and then complete it on your own?
Yeah, in the past, typically I have the idea for every song. I'll have a melody line in mind, and I'll send guitars and the melody line and very rudimentary ideas for bass or keyboards out to the other guys. Everybody contributes. Chris writes the majority of his drum parts, unless I have an idea, try this, try that, but he's an incredibly creative drummer and brings a lot to the table. Sean is an unbelievable bass player. I would be a guitar player playing a bass line, which means I'm not going to be nearly as inventive as he would be. And there have been times in our past where he's played something at rehearsal or when we're warming up for a show, and I'm like, wait a minute, do that riff one more time, and then I built an entire song around it. And this is not because I'm God's gift. It's because, Tom, I don't want him to, we decided early on he was not going to write for Redemption because he wants to preserve as much distinction between Redemption and Evergrey as we can. So he's not going to write, he's not going to play guitar. Also, I think part of why Tom enjoys this is it makes him think about melody differently than just writing in his own head. And that pushes him to grow as a musician, which as someone who's incredibly accomplished, he wants to do. And other people have other bands and projects, and I've never wanted to, them to say, "Oh, is this which bucket should I put this idea in?" So I've always tried to shoulder the burden of that. But everybody contributes. The big difference this time is Vikram, who is in addition to being a prodigy as a performer, is an incredibly talented composer and arranger and producer as well. And so he had his fingerprints a little bit on our last record, but on this one, he brought a couple of pretty fully formed ideas, one of which at least is one of the more popular early reacting tracks called The Emotional Depiction of Light. And he also had a major hand in helping me in a couple of other sections where I would say, all right, I got this part done. I got this part done. I could spend 3 weeks researching theory on how to get point A to point B, but you've already done 4 years of theory in school, so why don't you solve it for me? So he's been a very integral part. And of course, even on the stuff that was mostly my ideas, his fingerprints are all over it in terms of orchestrating and adding sounds.
Is I Am the Storm a concept album?
No, not per se. I think there's a common theme in all of our music, which is sort of we as described earlier, we sort of combine the light and dark musically. So we're very, I think, pretty heavy and can have some aggressive riffing, but we're also very, very melodic. And marrying those two is something that, you know, doesn't happen very much other than bands like Evergrey or Nevermore. There aren't a whole lot of examples of that. We do the same thing lyrically in that I don't have it in me to write about dragons and trolls and flaming swords. No offense to those bands that do, that's all fun, but it's just not who I am. I have always tried to write about our humanity and our relationship with ourselves, with other human beings, and with the world in general around us. And in looking at those things, there's a lot of darkness, and there's struggle, and there's pain, and there's fright, but there's also hope and optimism and purpose and agency and a lot of really good things. So that's always been floating around there. I think I Am the Storm is, I got the idea. It's, if you look it up, it's all over the internet, but I first saw the quote on a wine bottle that said, "The devil said to the warrior, you will not survive the storm. The warrior whispered back, I am the storm." And I thought, A, that's pretty metal. And B, what a great statement of empowerment. Like, look, and you know, I think if there is a concept to this record, it also shows up in the song Resilience. We all get knocked down. You're not defined by how you get knocked down. You're defined by getting back up. And people, you know, we are, look, I had cancer. It's not like I opted to have cancer. Sometimes bad stuff happens to you. You can't control that, but you can control how you react, and you are at least partially an author of your life. So pick up the pen and write. That's basically the moral.
You're in remission from that cancer?
Yes. Thank you for asking. It's been a long time. It's kind of funny. The doctor who treated me, who's retired now, says I'm cured. Don't worry about it. The guy I see in follow-up, who was his right-hand guy, won't say I'm cured, but says it's very unlikely you will ever experience a recurrence. And then the guy I see locally every 3 months for just blood work says, I really can't explain why you're still in remission. Enjoy it while it lasts. I'm like, thanks. You know, that's why I didn't get treated by you, you jerk. So it's all good. You know, I don't really think about it that often. And when I do, I'm mostly reminded that I'm lucky to be here, and every day is a gift.
That's a good mindset.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about the singles you have out. I mean, I don't know if you're one of those writers that keep everything open for interpretation, or you want to discuss what the song is about, but let's talk a little bit about 7 Minutes from Sunset.
As we speak, Tom and our director, Patrick Galeas, are on a flight from Sweden to Los Angeles to work on a video for that. So yeah, I don't necessarily, I am not one that needs to keep it mysterious. So for those who don't want to know, skip ahead or move to the next paragraph, depending upon if you're reading or listening. 7 Minutes from Sunset draws parallels between the grind of a high pressure job and going into battle. And the 7 Minutes from Sunset is very literally, there's 7 minutes between my house and Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, during which I don't get cell coverage. So it's peace and quiet. I have nothing to do but listen to the radio. As soon as I get to Sunset Boulevard, cell phone lights up and I have to start dealing with work. So that's the reference there. And the rest of it, now that I've unlocked it, you'll recognize it as dealing with a boss and just getting clobbered all the time, which is something that, you know, that's another part of the challenges of life.
Awesome. Now let's talk a little bit about Remember the Dawn.
So I mentioned the three sides of the band. So the first single, I Am the Storm, is the aggressive side. 7 Minutes from Sunset is the melodic prog metal side, still edgy, but highly melodic. And then the third side, the bigger, more cinematic side, that's Remember the Dawn, is a great representation of that. Lyrically, it sort of, again, sums up, there's a lot of bad stuff that happens, but there's always something that can be positive around the corner if you look for it. And similarly, don't go through life thinking nothing bad's ever going to happen to you, because bad stuff happens inevitably. And it's sort of playing with the yin and yang of both those things.
As a prog rock band, it doesn't surprise me that you got a couple of prog rock covers. You have a Genesis cover of Turn It On Again and a Peter Gabriel cover of Red Rain. Have you guys gone down the covers route before?
Yeah, so we do one cover per album. And a lot of people have asked why two covers and why the unusual bonus materials and the way they're coming out. When we first started writing, we were writing Fast and Furious. I thought we were going to have 2 full CDs done. And so we were going to do a cover for each CD. And Tom sounds like Peter Gabriel. When we were playing with Chris Poland of Megadeth, who was kind enough not only to play on a few records for us, but also come out and play with us live. He was like, God, this Tom sounds like Peter Gabriel. You guys should cover a Peter Gabriel song. As it happens, Tom and I both have loved that song, Red Rain. And the live version of it is basically a 6-minute drum solo. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to feature Chris. So we had that done. And then maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had tinkered with the Genesis track. And it wasn't really working, but it's such a cool song. And I'll get to if we have time, we'll talk about, this is an era of songwriting where a song can get on the radio on top 40 radio even at the time. It's written in 13 and has no chorus. It ain't a pop song. It's not even the sort of late period Phil Collins Genesis stuff. This is prog rock. And we put it together, really liked the way it sounded, gave it to Tom. And I think Tom does these as a favor to me. I think he'd be just fine doing originals. But he sent it back like, this turned out unbelievably well with the vocals, and it did. So now we got 2 covers and an album and a half worth of music. And then, Evergrey started getting active, and we sort of got writer's block a little bit. And I'm like, we could slog through this for another 3, because I didn't want to just rush it or write filler, God forbid. We could slog through this for another 3 months. Then we're going to have 2 full albums. We might not be able to release the second album for another 18 months anyway, if the record label doesn't want to. So rather than that, because it's been a while, why don't we pull up stakes? We've got an album full of stuff. We got 2 covers, one of which we'll use as bonus materials, and we've got some other stuff that we'll put as bonus materials for vinyl first and then release digitally, which is what we did. It would have been out earlier, but we went with a producer who's a fabulous guy, but he overbooked himself, and it sat on his desk for literally 8 months before I said, dude, love you, but we can't do this anymore. Then we gave it to Simone, and I think with fabulous results. I'm really happy with the production. So that's the life story of the 2 covers and the recording process.
Simone seems to be the go-to guy in prog rock today. He's got his band DGM over on Frontiers Music that's doing some work. He's doing work with them, and he's definitely taking these outside projects as well.
He's also become an incredibly competent producer who's in high demand. Obviously, he did that A to Z record on your wall there. He did Mike Romeo's solo stuff, which is mind-blowing. I did a phenomenal job with this. I honestly think I've never heard a better guitar player. The stuff he does is absolutely mind-boggling to me. There's a solo he did on The Art of Loss for us on a song called Slouching Towards Bethlehem. I've never heard a more just stupefyingly impressive guitar solo in my life. And I remember giving it to him, and I'm like, well, this alternates between 7/8 and 9/8 in a weird key. Good luck. And he basically cursed me out. And then 2 days later, sent back this thing, and Ray was our singer at the time, and Ray's sort of over guitar solos. And I remember sitting there listening to it with him, and we both just started laughing. It's so it's silly how good it is. So, and on top of all that, you couldn't ask to meet a nicer, just more professional, awesome guy. I love that dude. So I'll work with him as long as he'll work with me.
And you've been working with Chris Poland for a while, former Megadeth guitarist. How did you end up getting him involved in prog rock?
Just another wonderful guy. He's always had this really unique style that's closer. It's like Alan Holdsworth meets Mahavishnu Orchestra meets metal. And in fact, as we were getting to know each other, he was telling me, of course, we talk about Megadeth. He's like, when I was doing press for Peace Sells, or even before then, Dave's like, when people ask you who your influences are, don't mention any of that weird shit. Just say Michael Schenker. So we had decided to bring in some guest guitar players to play leads because our founding other guitar player, Bernie Versailles, unfortunately had a terrible aneurysm and doesn't really play guitar anymore. But at the time, we were just sort of in a holding pattern. And I thought, all right, we're going to do session work. Who's out there that's great? And a buddy of mine mentioned this guy, Matt Johnson of the band Pharaoh, mentioned Chris Poland did session work. And I'd seen Chris play with his band Ohm, this fusion band that he was in by another name, really, even before he joined Megadeth. And the playing is just, it's crazy good and sounds like nobody else. So I found out he could do session work, and I got a hold of his manager and wound up hitting it off. And I think he elevates the music by taking it in places that people don't expect, which is always great and hard to do, frankly.
This is I Am the Storm is your first studio album for AFM Records. How did you end up signing with them?
So I've got a day job. So I'm very business oriented. So I've never been an artist who has been a pain to labels. I know they got a tough job. The music business is very, very difficult. I've gotten along really well with every label that we've worked with, and the Metal Blade folks are personal friends of many years. We left Metal Blade and signed with AFM because AFM was more supportive of the live package, and Tom had a long relationship with Nils, who runs AFM, and he's a fantastic guy. And we hit it off immediately, and they've been great so far, setting up interviews like this and getting the word out, and we're very supportive of the live package. So I'm hoping to be successful for them and continue on together.
This is the second album for Tom on vocals. How did you end up getting him in the fold?
Well, I'd known him as a friend for many, many years. And when it became evident that Ray was not going to be able to do it anymore, I mentioned up top, what sets our music apart, I think, a little bit is that the emotional aspect of it and the ability of the singer to connect the audience to these lyrics, which really are about being a human being. And it's kind of hard to do that if you have a singer that takes you out of that experience. So there are a lot of great, great singers that wouldn't really fit the bill. And if you look around and think about who really delivers just raw emotional power, Tom is at the absolute top of the list. So I knew he's somebody that I wanted. Ray thought it was a great idea. We're all still friends, obviously. I remember being in a rock bar late at night after quite a few drinks in Gothenburg with Tom, and I asked him if he'd do it, and he paused and said, "Can I tell you if it sucks?" And I'm like, "We're friends. If it sucks, you better tell me." So once we got over that conversation, then we had a more serious talk about not wanting it to sound too much like Evergrey, and how I managed to deal with Ray being in Fate's Warning and not getting in the way of their recording or touring for the better part of 10 years. So I made a pledge that I wouldn't interfere with his obligations to Evergrey. And then we, gave it a crack and really liked how it sounded. And, we have so much fun together, which is really at the end of the day, unless you want this to become a job and then you start churning out stuff that isn't really inspired. We love doing this. We have a blast hanging out. We have a blast creating together. And it's really a privilege to work with people that are so talented and also just great guys.
Thought it was really cool how you guys all came together with Tom. You planned it around your performance at the Prague Rock Festival. Let me get the name right.
Prague Power USA.
Prague Power USA. You brought it all together for Prague Power USA. You timed it around the release of the album. You had the announcement a year in advance, and it all came together at that performance, which you ended up releasing last year or the year before as a CD DVD package.
Yes, and Blu-ray. Actually, we wanted to get a Blu-ray done because we had 11 cameras going and figured might as well take advantage of it. Yeah, it was actually Tom's idea to have Ray come over and do the one song, and I thought, you know what? I'm already flying Chris Poland out. We're already going to do that. Well, why don't we just pull out all the stops and really try and make this special? And it was great. A little teary-eyed. I won't lie. Ray was like kind of touched at the response of the audience, and it was just a really, really good time. And I think that shows on stage and in the performance.
What are your performance plans for 2023?
Well, it's tough. In the last 5 years, it's become very expensive to bring people over from Europe to perform. And I've got 2 band members in Europe. So we'd be looking at, $10,000 just to get permission to do a show. And, we're not a big band. We're not going to be selling out 1,500, person places. So we got to, we either need to find a band that we can open for that's touring the US and that can also work around all of our schedules. Tom's got Evergrey. I've got a day job. Or more likely, we need to get over to Europe, probably be cheaper and more feasible to take the American members and fly them over to Europe than the other way around. And that usually takes getting on 1 or 2 of those big festivals, which tend to book a long time in advance. So we got to start talking with AFM now about helping us get on the 2024 roster for the Sweden Rocks and the Hellfest of the world, and hopefully be able to build some touring around that. I'd love to go out and play any place. The other thing is, this is hard work to learn a Redemption set. I wrote the music, and it probably takes me 60 hours of individual rehearsal to get to the point where I think I can play it competently enough to show up with my bandmates. And then we got to rehearse for another 60 hours as a band before we can get on stage and do it justice. So hard to get. It's not like we're getting together every weekend jamming. You can go out and just do a one local show. It takes a little bit more advance notice than that, which is why we don't get out as much as we'd like. But we definitely want to get out there. So.
Did you purposely coincide the release of I Am the Storm around the 20th anniversary of your debut release?
No, and somebody pointed out it's been about 20 years, and I'm like, wow, it talk about time flying. I guess a lot has happened in that interim. No, to be honest, we did not, but happy that we're still here, certainly. And I think if you told us 20 years ago, certainly if you told me that we'd done half of what we've done, I would have thought you were crazy. And the fact that we're still around, have a fan base that is interested, and we haven't run out of inspiration, I think is, I don't think we've made the same album twice yet. And I hope that we don't do that. Although if we do, I hope it's Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules. But no, it's been a great 20 years, and hopefully, none of us are getting tired anytime soon.
You've mentioned your work outside of music, specifically in the song 7 Minutes from Sunset. You're kind of an important figure in the video game world. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do there? Or do you like to keep the music and your day job separate?
No, I'm happy as long as people aren't bored to tears. I'll try and be quick about it. For years, I did mergers and acquisitions at Disney. So I worked when Disney bought Pixar and Marvel and Lucas. I worked on those projects. I then wanted to run something instead of just doing deals. So I went to Activision, the makers of Call of Duty, and they own Blizzard, the makers of Overwatch, Warcraft, to run a film and television business for them, because video games, until very recently, had never really been adapted properly for film and television. There's a reason for that, which I won't get into here because it's too long and too boring. But there's a way to do it properly, and some people are now doing it, The Last of Us being the most recent example. So I left Activision, which was not really prepared to dive. They got distracted by esports and didn't really want to dive into this, and went to an Asian video game company called Nexon, which is huge in Korea, also big in Japan and China and Taiwan. Just hasn't really made it over here yet, although we have fans here. The games just aren't as widely available. So what I'm doing is broadening the appeal of those games and bringing that IP to a global audience to help the company grow, and also to expand the value of those franchises. And we do that in partnership with a company that we own a big chunk of, which is the production company, the Russo brothers, who did the Gray Man and the Avengers movies and a lot of stuff for Marvel. So the reason it's never been adapted, stuff has not been adapted well, is the video game people try to write the stories. They're very good at making games. They're adequate at telling stories. So you really need great storytellers who do that for a craft. Because the only thing that matters to a game is great gameplay. What matters to a movie is you have to have stories and characters that are original and that you're invested in. And it's just a different. It's like hiring a brain surgeon to design a house. Different skills.
In relation to stories in video games today, obviously music plays a role in kind of the way that music plays a role in movies.
Yeah, absolutely. The neat trick in games is it has to be reactive music, where whether you move into a different part of the landscape, or you encounter a foe, or things get a little dicey, the music has to change dynamically to reflect what's going on in the game. That's a whole separate ball of wax that's pretty interesting and requires a great deal of skill.
Is it going to be possible, or you might have already done it, and I don't know, to kind of license Redemption music out for games and movies and commercials and stuff like that?
I wouldn't do it at my own company just because of the conflict of interest. If anybody's listening, my old boss Bobby at Activision, if you resurrect Guitar Hero, I'll give you a Redemption song cheap. Yeah, I mean, it would need to be the right type of game. If they do another Brutal Legend game, maybe I'll try and glom onto that. For those that didn't play Brutal Legend, I mean, I don't even know how good the game was, to be honest, but it had a ton of awesome music, and actually, like guest performances as characters in the game from like Lemmy and Ozzy and Rob Alford and a bunch of other luminaries in our musical world.
Well, since you're possibly not going to be hitting the road this year, have you been working on new music?
Just starting to. I have a perpetual library of ideas or riffs or things, and I wanted to take a little bit of a breather just because I wanted to be a fresh break and come into it with a brand new mindset, so that we don't just start off by writing the last half of the second record that we didn't finish last time. And there's some other stuff that I'm tinkering with right now that is not Redemption, that I don't think will be a huge time sink. I would expect we'll get back to writing the next record sometime before the end of the year. I certainly don't want it to be 4.5 years before it comes out. I want to, get this next one out quick.
Those are all the questions I have for you today, Nick. The new Redemption album is I Am the Storm. It's out now on AFM Records. I was very impressed with this one. I'm not typically drawn to prog metal, but this one really roped me in. I just ordered my vinyl.
Awesome. George, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and that of your listeners.
Absolutely. And thank you for speaking with KNAC.com today.
Absolutely an honor.